Ukraine and Russia have conditions that could affect a ceasefire. What are they willing to concede? A ceasefire in Russia hinges on one of the 30-day pause in fighting as a confidence-building measure for both sides to hammer out the long-term peace plan. Ukrainian President Zelensky has warned that President Putin will look to delay such a temporary truce with conditions meant to divert the peace process and lengthen the war. Ukraine, which to accept the ceasefire after President Trump and intelligence sharing expects that he will threaten more sanctions on Moscow to push Putin into accepting the terms. And as he disclosed that, Trump said that the land and power plants are part of the conversation around bringing the war to a close, a process he described as dividing up certain assets. But beyond the temporary ceasefire, both sides seem unwilling to make large concessions to the other, and both have red lines that they insist cannot be crossed. And take a look at the issue. What are Russia's demands? When Putin launched its full-scale invasion February 24, 2022, he demanded that Ukraine renounce joining NATO, sharply cut its army, and protect Russian language and culture to keep the country in Moscow's orbit. And now he also demands that Kiev withdraw its forces from the 4 regions in September 2022, but never fully occupied Donetsk, Lugansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. Russia officials also have said that any peace deal should involve releasing Russian assets that were frozen in the West and lifting other U.S. and European Union sanctions. The Trump administration has proposed putting potential sanctions relief on the table. And along with that, Putin has repeatedly emphasized the need to remove the root cause of the crisis, a reference to the Kremlin's demand to roll back a NATO military buildup near Russian borders that it describes as major threat to its security. He also argues that Zelensky, whose term expired last year to sign a peace deal, Kiev maintains that elections are impossible to hold amid a war. Trump has echoed Putin's view, speaking of the need for Ukraine to hold an election. Russian officials have also declared that Moscow would not accept troops from any NATO members as peacekeepers to monitor the prospective truce in Ukraine. And what are Ukraine's demands? Facing setbacks along the 1,000-kilometer, the 620-mile front, Ukraine has backed away from demanding that its state borders be returned to pre-2014 lines because it does not have the military force capable of reaching that end. Ukraine is asking for a peace deal cemented with security guarantees from international allies that will ensure that Russia is never able to invade again. In lieu of NATO membership, the long-sought desire by Kiev that appears to be nearly impossible without U.S. backing, what those guarantees might look like is taking shape in parallel talks led by France and Britain, envisions European boots on the ground, and a strong military response if Russia were to launch a new offensive. Zelensky has insisted that Ukrainian army be strengthened to withstand future Russian offensives, a costly endeavor that will require quick and consistent support from international allies. A stockpile of weapons capable of doing serious damage to Russian assets is another demand. Kiev also wants to bolster its domestic arms industry to lessen its reliance on allies, a reality that has set Ukrainian forces back throughout the war. And Ukraine has key demands from Russia as well. Kiev refuses to cede more territory to Moscow, including those in partially occupied regions. Also, Ukraine is seeking the return of children legally deported to Russia and thousands of civilians detained in Russian prisons. Concessions and red lines. Both sides have red lines that are mutually exclusive, making negotiations extremely challenging. The U.S. has said both sides must make concessions. The fate of 1/5 of Ukrainian land now under Russian control is likely to take center focus. For Moscow, the presence of NATO member states as either peacekeepers or a reassurance of force outside of the alliance framework is a red line, but Moscow has not mentioned any specific concessions. For Ukraine, which is in a weaker position, the question of territory held by Russia that does not have the military means to retake is central. For Kiev, it is both a red line and a potential concession. Zelensky has said that his country will never recognize the territory as Russian, but Ukrainian officials concede that while officially this always will be Kiev's position, the occupied territories are likely to remain under Russian control for some time. Partners know our red lines, that we do not recognize the occupied territories as the territories of the Russian Federation, and we do not recognize them, Zelensky told journalists recently. This is my political will as president, and this is the political will of our people. This is a violation of international law and the Constitution of Ukraine, he said. And Ukraine also rejects restrictions on the size and capability of its armed forces, as well as its limits on its ability to join international alliances such as NATO and even the European Union. And Kubal reported this from Kiev. This is from Associated Press on DNYUZ. Please leave your comments and thank you for your support. Please support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.